Acha, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So today we will continue our study of firms and trade and industries, and one of the key issues that makes the standard supply and demand analysis completely wrong, and it's a mistake like saying 2 plus 2 equals 5, is because they don't understand the meaning of exogeneity and endogeneity. So as long as supply and demand are separate completely, then the supply and demand analysis holds. But if the supply and demand are coming from the same place, then the so-called ceteris paribus assumptions are not valid, because the things that they are holding constant cannot be constant. It's like saying that let's assume the prices are constant in one part of the argument and let them change in another part of the argument. So today I'm going to do the supply and demand analysis in a situation where the assumptions work, but I will show you how it works, and then we will study the case which is normally studied where both markets are the same. So that's called the general equilibrium situation, in which case there is no supply and demand theory. So even in the case that we will study, things are different. So let's start. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم خلق الإنسان من صلصال كالفخار وخلق الجان من مارج من نار فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان صدق الله العظيم. So Allah Ta'ala has created us and He knows best who we are, and so if we study about the behavior of human beings from the Quran, we will get to much deeper insights about what human beings are. And in other places I have shown that what is written in the latest chapter in behavioral economics about human behavior is not sophisticated, is actually wrong compared to what the Quran gives us. For example, the behavioral economic books ask, are human beings naturally kind or are they selfish? This is the standard question. Are they general? So what the Quran tells us is that neither is true. There is لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ ثُمَّ رَدَدْنَاهُ أَسْفَلَ سَافِلِينَ. Both of the characteristics are present in the heart of man, the selfishness, the animal-like behavior, and also the angel-like behavior. And these two characteristics are at war with each other. So you can find examples of very bad behavior by people and also examples of very good behavior. And the Islam teaches us how to fight for the good and how to try to suppress the bad. And this is very important because you see the standard way of thinking says that there are some people who are good and some people who are bad. And if somebody is a bad person, then we can hate him and we can despise him and we can be contemptuous. But Islam teaches us that no, as bad as anyone is, I am just as bad. And so I can't feel proud or say that it's only that Allah Ta'ala has protected me from acting in the ways. Otherwise, that is in my nature also to be very, very bad, very evil. So if Allah Ta'ala has protected me from acting in evil ways, this is a great mercy and blessing of Allah. And I cannot feel that this person is inferior to me because he is doing something wrong, because I can do much worse if I was given the position. So the only thing to do is to how we can help. So the Prophet ﷺ said that help your brother whether he is right or wrong. So the Sahaba said, how can you help your brother if he is doing wrong? So he said, by preventing him from doing the wrong thing. So this is our job. So if we want to do social science, which means study of human beings, societies, the Quran offers us much deeper insights than anything that is available currently in Western social science anywhere. So now we just actually do a recap what we did in the last lecture. but then we will go on to the new topics. So first we remember that the farm size, so we have a standard situation in mind. There is a city, it is surrounded by villages, the villages produce food for the city, and the city produces manufactures for the whole world, but also for the rural area. So now within the rural area, we saw that the farm size is indeterminate within the range of sizes where you have constant returns to scale. Now even if farm size is determinate, so that there is only one point at which you have constant returns to scale, this can happen. Industry size is indeterminate, so you have many farms of that size, and that can expand indefinitely. Basically, because when you have constant returns to scale, then it means that the standard picture which is given in the textbooks is that at some point the costs start increasing, and so you have to stop expanding. So there is a industry size that is determined. So this is actually not true theoretically and not true empirically. Empirically also, the surveys that we cited by Blinder show that the firms and industries produce at places where the costs are either decreasing or they are constant. Increasing costs are very rare. So the textbook theory applies very rarely. Now, the second insight is that wage must be less than the marginal value of product of labor. This is just a profit condition, that if you hire a labor and the value added by that labor is less than the wage that you are paying him, then you will lose, and this is something which is very simple and plain and easy to understand and will normally be done. Now, why does the wage equal the marginal value product? Well, there are many assumptions built into the theory which create this equalization, but in reality this equalization does not hold, and we will actually see much more clearly in this lecture why this must be so. So the forcing of the idea that the wage is equal to the marginal value product, basically what it says is that you keep hiring until and the marginal product of labor keeps going down. Marginal value, as I said, a marginal value product must be higher, so you keep hiring until it goes down because you have diminishing marginal product. And that also makes sense logically, but in our model with activity analysis, at one point the first laborer gives you the entire marginal value product, so and the second laborer has zero. So you can never get to this equality, and this is actually the closer to the truth case. Then the point is, you see that we are considering a situation where the firms are small, they can't affect the wage, so the idea that the price changes to equilibrate the wage cannot happen because wage is exogenous. So this is the problem with the standard supply and demand argument. Is incoherent. For some parts of the argument it assumes that wage is fixed, for other parts it assumes that wage is moving, and this cannot be done. This can be done in some very specialized situations which we will discuss, but you have to understand what the assumptions are which make it work. So now the rural area will simply expand because the firms are to the maximum capacity, and there is a maximum capacity. It utilizes all land available, and so basically the idea of the supply and demand argument is that the industry will keep expanding, and that will force up the demand for labor, and the wages will go up. Now you have to consider that I mean, the firms are operating under the assumption that the wages are fixed. So this argument, how can it be made? And also in the context that we are doing, where we are making it, we are forcing it to happen, that the wages are exogenous because they are determined by the national market, and the firm is small according to the competitive assumption, then the firm expands to the maximum capacity, and it has no effect on the wage because it's a small part of the. So again, you utilize all the land available, and there is no possibility of increasing the demand for labor. Now the industry as a whole, which is producing whatever it's producing, we'll call it corn in this lecture, over the whole nation, when it expands, then it will have an effect. So what happens at the firm level is different from the industry level, and this is very important because in the conventional text, they assume that the industry is n times the firm, but that's not true. Actually, there's a complexity involved. What happens, the phenomena which happen at the industry level don't happen at the firm level, and vice versa. So basically, exogeneity is of prices. It means that the firms are price takers, not price makers. So then price is fixed due to factors outside their control, and what they do cannot affect the price. Now actually, as some people have argued that the firm expands, it does affect the price, and this is true, but the effect is small, and so for a first order of approximation, we can ignore that effect, and so we can assume that approximately true that the prices are exogenous, which is exactly what the competitive argument says. But industry as a whole cannot have prices exogenous, because all the firms, when they start producing, then the output becomes significantly large, and that will affect the prices. And this makes a difference because if you want to maximize revenue for the industry as a whole, then you will have to restrict the production, and in order to make the price exogeneity assumption work, we considered the case where you have international trade, so everything is exported outside and you have international prices, so that the exogeneity can be whole. In that case, if the country is a small country and its output of the raw material doesn't affect the world market, then competitive assumption holds. If it is large in the market, then its output will affect size, and then the optimal strategy will involve restricting the output. And so this is against the free trade argument, and the government must intervene to make sure that the prices are restricted. And if there are multiple countries, then they have to coordinate their production plans, and that's a little bit difficult to do. And actually there's a game that I asked the students to play, which I would like to arrange with this class at some outside class hours, maybe tomorrow. That shows how the coordination works and why it is difficult, and whether or not it can be achieved depends on many factors which can't be written in textbooks. We have, okay, so I'm going to go over the same model that we have done, but a little bit different to make it a little bit more general. So we have n farmers. We're going to assume actually 600 farmers. Each of them has 1 acre of land, and there's concentrated scale means that if you merge two farms, you have exactly double the output. So it doesn't matter whether you have big farms and small farms. So it's the same thing whether. We assume fixed proportions. So each farmer requires exactly one laborer per acre to produce 1 unit. Now these units are abstract. So one labor may represent 100 people or 10 people. So you have 1 unit of labor, 1 unit of land, and it produces 1 unit of bread. So now actually we're going to call it corn for a reason. Corn is all types of food. So the total demand for labor is going to be 600. Now the price of bread is determined. Now this time I'm going to now make slight changes. So the price of bread is determined by the demand in the city. So now the price is no longer exogenous, because if you produce more, then your price will fall. And so in order to keep things simple, we assume that all of the produce is sent to the city for sale. The farmers don't consume anything. We assume they all have separate side plots on which they grow their own food. So this production for commercial purposes only sold to the city. So as long as the price of the bread in the city, which is exogenous for the individual farmer, his own, but endogenous for the group of farmers as a whole, as long as this price is higher than the rural wage, which we will discuss what determines that later, then there's incentive to produce, there's profits. Now, so what will happen to these profits? Well, the profits will be divided into 2 parts. One is the entrepreneurship. I'm thinking that there is a landlord, maybe he's an absentee landlord, he owns the plot of land, and he hires a farmer. The farmer organizes production, he hires laborers and so on. So the farmer is the entrepreneur. So the surplus that you get after selling the bread and then paying the wages has to be divided between rent to the landlord and payment to the entrepreneur. So this is the basic model. Now, instead of assuming that we are having instead of assuming the Cobb-Douglas production function, which is a little bit unrealistic because you have fixed amounts, I'm going to assume a more realistic demand function. So here is the demand function that we have in the city. In the city, the maximum price that we allow is 80 for bread. I'll explain the reasons for this a little bit later. Actually, this has to do with history. See, models arise by trying to look at historical episodes and trying to create a simple model which explains what happened in reality. So actually here I'm going to show what happened in England, and I'm going to show how this model explains what happened in England over the 19th century, over a certain period of time. So this is the key thing which is missing from economics textbooks. They have models which are all in the air and they have no connection to reality. And that is why they make elementary blunders and never find out, because they don't try to match the thing to reality. If they tried to match it to reality, they would immediately see that there is some mistake in the model. But since it's all in the air, there is no connection, so you can make mental mistakes without ever finding out. So there's a maximum price, because if the price exceeds that, then imports come in. You can import bread at a high price from maybe other cities in the in the country or maybe internationally. So there is a maximum price which is the outside option. So price cannot rise above that, even if there is lots of scarcity. So if there is lots of scarcity, if the village doesn't produce anything, it's only 100 units of bread. Bread is necessary. Here we can think that 200 is the minimum requirement of the bread. So if bread falls short of that, then they will import to make up their shortfall. This is something that we observe in Pakistan, that if there is some essential commodity which falls short of domestic demands, then we import from outside. It is not as the models teach, that as the scarcity increases, the prices will skyrocket. No, there is a upper control. There's a, because outside options are available. And similarly, bread is bread. You can only eat so much. So there is a maximum. After 800, if somebody says, okay, lots of bread is available for free outside, who wants to take it? Well, if we are not hungry, then we will say, okay, let somebody else eat it. So maximum demand is 800 units, and after that, even if it is for free, you don't consume. So now, at this point, what we assume is that the rural wage is 20. So rural wage is 20 means that, let us assume, first of all, exogeneity. So if exogeneity, this means that the rural wages, laborers have outside options, and the wage is determined in the national area. So all over the country, the wage is 20. So if you offer less, people will go outside of your rural area. If you offer more, you can get other people will migrate in. So you don't need to offer more. So as long as you match your rural wage. So this is what it makes it exogenous. This is something which I keep saying because conventional textbooks are extremely unclear on this. They don't understand this, and this makes a huge difference, as we will see. When you assume something is exogenous, this corresponds to some real conditions, and if these conditions hold, then you can assume exogeneity. If they don't, then you can't. You can't say that, okay, we choose not to study the wage, so we make it exogenous. You can't make it exogenous by assumption. So rural wage we assume exogenous 20. Entrepreneur is also, as we assume that they can migrate freely and manage. Farm managers are in demand all over the country, and this is what they charge, 20. So that leaves 20 for the landlords. Now the rent, we can also fix that by assuming that there is a minimum acceptable rent for the landlords, and that is 20. This means also there is a reason that why should landlords, I mean, if there is, there has to be some reason for this, otherwise the landlord rent could fluctuate. So to fix it, we have to say that, for example, there is an outside option. If the landlords don't get that much, then they would rather use their land for hunting and for other purposes rather than renting, because so there is a minimum rent at which it becomes interesting for them to rent. If it's less than, if they're getting less than 20, they don't want to rent. They have some outside option. There's something else they can do with that land. So with these assumptions, then 60 is the cost of production of 1 unit of wheat. You have to pay 20 to the laborers. There's no option. You have to pay 20 to the farmer. You have to pay 20 to the landlord. And so the price of wheat cannot be below 60. And at 60, everybody is willing to produce. So your supply curve is that if price is below 60, the production is 0. At 60 or above, you have maximum possible production, which is 600, as according to this graph. Now, this means that at the price of 60, the demand in the city is 400 units. So there is an excess supply of 200 units. of bread. So, what will happen? According to the standard theory that you have studied of supply and demand, the price will adjust. You have excess supply, but the price cannot adjust. The price is fixed. Something else must adjust. So there are several possibilities. We will discuss them, and it will depend on certain things which can happen in the village as to what will adjust. So this is, now we are constructing a model which is very close to the standard supply and demand. All of the exogeneity assumptions made are actually being made. The demand is separated because it's coming from the city, supply is separated. In these conditions, the supply and demand theory works, but even then it doesn't work. The price has to be 60 purely because of the cost structure. It is not dependent on the demand. And the price will remain 60 even if there is insufficient demand. So now what will happen? I will discuss several cases. One of the cases is that suppose that the workers can migrate and the farmers can migrate, but the land is fixed, it cannot. So that's the first place where the hit will come. It has to. Now, there are various ways that the land can take the hit. One of them is that maybe the land rent is flexible, maybe the minimum acceptable rent. If there are not many outside options, then the land rent will go down. What actually is the equilibrium price here? The equilibrium output is, so if you go down, if the land rent can go down, then the output will expand. But as I have drawn the graph, the 600 intersects with 40, which means that the land rent will go to 0. That's also possible, that land becomes worthless. Or if the graph is slightly different, then it could be that at that point you are getting some rent. So one of the possibilities is if the land is truly free, which is what sometimes is assumed, then the land rent will equilibrate. It will come to the value. In this graph it will be 0. It could be, with other graphs it could be 10, 15. So whatever the value. So that's one way equilibrium could happen under our assumptions that the wages are exogenous and the entrepreneur rent is exogenous. Also, if we fix the entrepreneurs, the farmers are attached to the place and they can't migrate, then their share will adjust. So and it can be a complicated process. All three could adjust. But the price, the adjustment could be in prices in that way. So now, who takes more will depend on the relative power of the three classes of people that we have: the landlords and the farmers and the peasants. Depending on their power, there's a downward pressure. If there is full production, then it cannot occur at 60 price. So one of the classes must lose, or all three, and some combination must work out. One of the crucial differences here is, as I've already pointed out, that the shares are not fixed by the output, because what's happening is that the production is a joint activity of the land and the farmer and the peasant, and you cannot take out one part and calculate the marginals as you do in neoclassical, because whatever you take out, all three are required in activity analysis, so you'll get 0. So in some sense you can justify the labor theory of value, saying that if there are no laborers, then there is no product. But you can also justify the land theory of value, which is what the physiocrats did. If you take out the land, then there is no production. Or if you take out the farmer, there is no production, because you need somebody to organize. So all of them are equally necessary. So this idea of marginal product, which is used to justify, doesn't work in this model. And this is pretty close to accurate description of reality. Now, so I said that one of the ways is that the prices adjust, then the shares that the classes are receiving adjust. But suppose that these are all fixed by external, everybody has an outside option, landlords have outside option of 20, so the prices cannot adjust. Then what will happen? Then the only thing that can happen is that 400 acres of land will come into a production, and you suppose then we can think of the adjustment process. Suppose 1 year everybody produces bread, they all take 600 units of the bread to the city, and they ask 60 because it doesn't pay them to sell the bread for less. They will make a loss. So they ask 60 for it, so 400 units are sold, and 200 units either go to waste, or seeing that they will not sell, they reduce the prices, but they come back and report that we have had a loss on the farm. So of the 600 farms, 400 will cover costs, and the remaining 200 will be run at a loss. So if they foresee that this is going to continue, then they will just stop operations, and so everybody will take the upside option. 200 rural laborers will migrate outside, the 200 farmers will migrate, and 200 landlords will take their properties out of the market, and so you will have equilibrium according to the standard supply and demand picture, but by quantity adjustment, not by price adjustment. There are some very interesting coordination problems which arise. That is, who are which particulars, they are all identical. Which farms will go out of business? We won't study them, but I mean, you can make some models to play with that, but these are not the big things that are worth studying. So basically, economic theory is designed to ensure that students never learn how the real world works, because they just teach you the wrong things, so you focus on the wrong things. And even though it's not difficult to understand how the real world works, it's just that economic theory is designed to make sure that you never find out, because if you find out, then you can change things. So here is the equilibrium outcome 1. Entrepreneurs get 20, laborers get 20, landlords get 20, 200 of them drop out, cost of production is 60, price is 60, 400 units are produced, and that's what I've already described. Now, I want to consider that this equilibrium is possible but unlikely, because it doesn't correspond to the power structure of the situation, in which you see the landlords are getting the disadvantage, 200 of them are dropping out, and everybody else is doing fine. So there are other ways that production could be organized, in which landlords can get more benefits. So one of the ways that the landlords can do better is, because now we have a situation where the output of bread is determining the prices, So it is in their advantage to group together and produce bread at monopoly levels rather than at competitive levels. If they restrict the output of bread, then the prices will rise, and so they can make more revenue. This is your standard monopoly versus competition argument. One thing that I want to explain to you is that instead of doing the maximization by calculus, you should learn how to do maximization by Excel. That's because you get a more direct hands-on understanding of what is happening. So this solution, this second equilibrium that now we are studying, we have studied the competitive equilibrium, which is rather different from the standard supply and demand equilibrium. But now the landlords in the village get together and say that we are not doing too well. Why? Because we see that too much bread is being produced. Because we see it with our eyes that if you produce excess, and we would like to we have the capacity to produce bread, but if we produce more, it gets wasted. And so this is the thing that is a dilemma that we often see in our country, where if you have bumper harvest, then the farmers are crying because the prices are too low. I mean, this shouldn't happen, but this is the reality. I mean, you think that you have produced a lot, so you will benefit from it, but actually it doesn't happen because the excess production drives the prices down. So the landlords get together and they say, why don't we restrict the production of bread and increase the profits? Now the calculus actually gives us some insights, but these insights are better understood. Oh, this is the wrong one. Okay. So here is the demand supply. So this will happen, as I will explain. I mean, these are the things that, suppose that we have just one landlord, very easy, and he rents the plots to different farmers, and he sees that if I produce 400, then the price is 60. Here I have the schedule. Should I increase this? Yeah. So at the production level of 100, the price is 80. At the production level of 200, the price is 80, 370, and so on. So now what I want to do is to ask, what should the level of production be in order for me to maximize the profits? So now what happens is that when you increase production, here I have made the same thing. I have made the same graph, but I have made it from 140 and in units of 10 increase of prices, so I can see. So it's just linear. As you increase the production by 10 units of bread, the price goes down by 1 unit. So from at 140, the price is 86, 150 it's 85, and so on, and it keeps going up. So now now the key intuition, this is something, basically you see, you need to understand the concept behind the numbers. So when I increase production, the price goes down. So now going from 140 to 150, I have produced 10 more units of bread. So I have gained 10 times the 85 rupees of profits. That's the additional profit. But I have a loss because I have 1 rupee of prices goes down, and so the loss is of 140 because all of my units have to be sold at the new price. So previously the price was 86, but so now I take a loss on everything that was produced up to now, and I gain a profit on 1 unit. So basically, as I keep increasing the price, the loss keeps increasing and the gain keeps decreasing. At some point, the two will match up. So basically, the marginal revenue should equal the marginal cost. That's what the calculus tells you, but you should have an intuitive understanding of this. So this second column, this is the production. This is the price. This is the revenue. And this is the profit. So here you can see that the bread is produced is 140, the price is 86. The revenue is the product of the price and the bread, and the units of production. And the profit is the revenue minus 40. You have to pay 20 to the laborer and 20 to the farmer. That's your cost. The remaining is the amount that the landlord gets. So the profit is 640. It increases until you get to 300 and then it starts going down. So basically the monopolist level of production is 300 units. And you can set this up in Excel and easily calculate it without knowing any calculus. And you can understand it. That's also important. You can understand it by noting that now at 300, when you produce one more unit, what happens? Well, when you produce one more unit, the price is 70. This is given to you. There's a linear. So 300 times 70 is 21,000. That's the revenue that you're making at 300 production. Now suppose you add 10 more units of production. So the price will go down by one more unit to 69. So your additional gain will be 390. Why? You produce 10 units of bread and you pay and you get 69 for it. So, oh yeah, I see. No, I don't see. Oh yeah, okay. So when you produce 10 units of bread, you get 69 for the new 10 units. That's 690 rupees. But you lose 1 rupee on all of the 300 units that you had produced earlier. So 690 minus 300 is 390. That is the marginal revenue, right? Is that clear? Yes. So 390, 21,000 was your revenue before, and now it's 21,390 because you gained 690 from the new units you sold, but you lost 300 from the loss of price on the first 300. And so your profits are this revenue minus the marginal cost. The marginal cost of production is 40 times 10, which is 400. The marginal cost for the new 10 units is 400. So you paid 400 to produce these 10 units, but you gained only 390. So it's not worth it to go. So that's why your marginal revenue and marginal cost. And this is direct understanding as opposed to the calculus. So this is how it works. So that's the standard monopolist formula. But remember that this works only because I have separated the demand and the supply. If they were in the same market, these formulas would not work because the ceteris paribus assumptions don't hold when your market is also your demander. Here I have separated the two markets cleanly, so the demand theory works. So the demand theory says, so that's then our next solution, next possible solution. So equilibrium 2, the monopolist will restrict output to 300 units. So if there's only one landlord, or if there are few landlords, they get together, they say, okay, take 300 units out of production. So we have a total of 600. Instead of taking 200 out, which is what the monopolist would do. So now the price of bread will rise to 70. It will no longer be 60. Employment will be reduced. 300 farmers and 100 more farmers will be going out of the area, and similarly 100 more laborers will leave the area. Total profits will be 9,000 as opposed to 8,000. Now this is the this is the monopolist solution, and it is an equilibrium. Now this is the game that I would like to have you play. That there is a problem with this equilibrium. If there's more than a few people, then a number of different problems arise. These are problems that are discussed in textbooks, the oligopoly problems. Basically, you have to leave 300 acres idle and use 300. And then the question is, who leaves his land idle and who gets the production? And if there's only one, there's no problem. He can say, okay, half of my land will be. If there are two, they can share that, okay, you leave half of your land idle and I leave half of mine. This works if they are equal in size. However, suppose that one landlord has 400 pieces and the other has 200. So one solution is that both of them do half and half. So the big landlord has 200 plots in operation and 200 idle, and the smaller one has 100 in operation and 100 idle. But the smaller one can say that, look, you're going to make 2/3 of the revenue and I'm going to make 1/3, and that's not fair. Why don't we split the rent? And so I will produce 150 and you produce 150, so I have 50 idle and you have a lot more. That is fair to him. So and now this is the problem that always occurs. This is the kind of problem that occurs in the types of games that we play, that there is some extra monopoly rent, but how it should be divided? Well, if everybody is symmetric, then it's easy. But if there are asymmetries, then different people have different ideas about what is fair division, and so problems arise on how to share the rent. There's a second problem that arises in the monopoly solution, and that is that the individual incentives conflict with the group incentives. That is the standard problem. So now suppose we have arrived at some solution. Both of them have agreed that we will use only half of the land. So the bigger landlord has 200 units in operation and the smaller one has 100 units in operation. Now individually each of them has incentive to cheat. If the smaller landlord produces 105 units instead of 100, he will make more profits. The price will come down. This price will come out of the revenue of the other person, and so there is of course he could also retaliate, and ultimately this is the kind of prisoner's dilemma, that if both people follow individually optimal strategies, then the social optimal will be lost. So there are these problems that occur with the oligopoly solution. Also, there is a political problem that arises, that basically if you restrict food supply in order to maximize profits, this is considered very socially undesirable. There's explicit discussion of this issue in many places. Of course, it's also forbidden Islamically that you should not hoard or essential materials pay monopoly to put in a monopoly to increase prices to make profits is prohibited by Islamic law. It's also prohibited by custom. It's also considered a very bad thing, socially unacceptable, legally. That's why actually people were very afraid of monopolies, because especially when it comes to food, if you restrict the supply of food and produce less food in order to raise prices, this is unethical. So there is this political problem of how you justify such a thing if people find out about it. Now, there are other ways that the landlords can use their power. One of them, which actually occurred in England, is that they can pass an act in Congress which is called the law of settlement. And what that law does is it prevents the laborers from moving out of your area. And it says that this is actually what produces the serfs. The peasants can't freely move. If they cannot move freely, then there is no labor market, and there is no labor market, then the wages can go down. Now the wages are no longer exogenous. See, this is the key. If no one can come in, no one can leave, then the landlords get to set the wage. They can say that this is the wage, and you are bound to the land, you have to accept. And so basically then what will happen is that wage will go to the subsistence wage. So now what that subsistence wage is, it depends on a lot of factors we don't know, but it's not determined by the production function, which is the key thing which neoclassical tells you. So let's suppose that the subsistence wage is 10. Now the farmers we leave out of the market for the moment. The settlement can only be imposed on the serfs, the peasants. So the landlords succeed in passing the law in the parliament that no one is allowed to move out of his own territory. Then the landlords can set the wage to 10, and now the cost of production becomes 30 instead of 40. 20 to the farmer, 10 to the laborer. And now even if the minimum acceptable rent is 20, which is we are still assuming as but that's what the landlords want, then the cost or the price of bread will be 50. So competitive equilibrium was 60, monopoly was 70. With this one, wage reduced to subsistence wage, the labor market broken up. Now at this price, at 50, if you go back to the graph, you can sell 500 units of bread in the city, because the city has its own demand function. If the price is lower, the demand is larger. So the production will now expand to 500 and so now from it was 400 at competitive equilibrium, it will become 500. 100 of the plots which were unused at the competitive equilibrium will now become used. Local rural wage will go down. This is and if this process takes place all over the country, then the rural wages will go down to the subsistence level. Now in the parliament, what will be said? This is very important, because it is not just that a law is made. A law has to be made and sold to other groups. So the landlords will argue in the parliament that this is good for the nation. The price of the food is going down. If we impose act of settlement, the labor cannot move, wages will be low, more food will be produced at cheaper price. They will not say that I'm trying to exploit the laborer to make more profits. they will say that we will produce more food, and that's true. This will benefit the entire nation, they will say, although it won't benefit the peasants. So, but they will say that the prosperity of the nation is built on the misery of the laborer. This is exactly what was said. However, industrials in the city will not like this. They will argue against this, because although they get cheaper food, they lose access to the supply of labor in the land. So they will say that no, the labor will be should be free to move, and they will passionately argue that, look, you are imposing misery upon the peasants, even though that's they have nothing to do. They want to impose even more misery on those peasants. But what they will argue in parliament is very different from what their real motivations are. So they will paint horrible. This is actually what happened. Horrible pictures of what happens in the rural areas where the poor peasant is so much exploited by the landlord. And they will. So both sides are using correct arguments. This is the interesting thing, that the landlords, what they are saying is completely true, that the food price will go down and the supply of food will expand, but they are not presenting the whole picture, only part of the picture. And similarly, the industrials are also presenting part of the picture, and everything they are saying is true, but it's not the whole picture. So the third equilibrium comes in with when you use the laws to break up labor unions. This is like, and so you prevent labor from having any power. So then you can dictate their wages, and you dictate their wages to be subsistence levels. And the wages goes down from the competitive market, open market 20, to the subsistence level of 10. And this leads to an expansion in output 500, and an increased employment and lower prices of bread. Now there is a contradiction here, that how can you expand labor if you have act of settlement? But this contradiction actually takes place and is resolved in many ways. If there is a demand for labor, then people don't look when people come in to job, they are not persecuted, they are quietly taken in. Also, you can expand by going down younger. You can start using children for labor, and you can put women into the workforce. And so there are various ways in which the extra labor which is required can be generated. So as long as excess capacity is available, there is a profit incentive to produce more bread. Somehow or the other, it will be found the people from the city will migrate to the rural area where jobs are available. So now many types of so the move from 400 equilibrium to 500 can be gradual. It will take place over time, because the extra demand for labor will come in from various ways, and no problem about that. But many types of changes can disturb these equilibria. This is actually called comparative statics, a subject that you have studied but never understood, because it is done in ways in which it is designed to make sure that nobody understands what's going on. So comparative statics basically says what happens if some of the exogenous parameters here change. And this is very important, because you can't do comparative statistics by changing endogenous variables. You can't ask the question, what happens if the price changes, because the price is not free to change in a situation where it is endogenous. Unfortunately, there's massive confusion about what is exogenous and what is endogenous. So what are the exogenous? Well, the production yield, for example. I've assumed that the one unit, 1 and 1 and 1 produce 1. But suppose now that there is technology change, it starts producing 1.2. What will happen? Well, farmers don't actually want to increase yields at this point. So there is no incentive to actually look for technological change, innovations, productivity increase. So this is a problem with this equilibrium. If you start putting taxes on rent, that will disturb the equilibrium, and you can calculate what will happen. And that this is what the subject of what happens if the number of laborers increases, what happens if the land increases, what happens if the city demand changes, etc. All of these things are part of the comparative statics. But one thing that is part of normal supply and demand, which I have deliberately ruled out, and that is what makes the traditional supply and demand invalid, is that at this point we are not thinking about what is happening in the city. Now, I've just analyzed the village in isolation, but actually as the village produces food for the city produces manufacturers for the village. And now if we take this into account, then exogeneity assumptions will be disturbed, because even the demand, you see, the demand for food in the city is dependent on how much food you produce, because how much food they can buy will determine what they produce and how much they can sell it for. And if they sell it to the village, then this is what these are the problems that arise in general equilibrium, and we will get there inshallah, but I want to do it one step at a time so that we understand all of the intermediate steps. So at this point, the city produces, manufactures and sells them abroad, so that there's no contamination of the production process in the city. So this is what exogeneity means, that whatever happens inside the model doesn't affect the variables that are exogenous. So here we are taking city demand for bread as exogenous, and this demand for bread will not be exogenous if the price of food affects what happens in the production process, affects the incomes of the people. And if the incomes of the people in the city is affected by the price of food, which it will be, and this affects their demand, then that factor has to be taken into account in a general equilibrium analysis. But for the moment, we assume that these effects are small and negligible. So now we move to, so these are issues that some of them we will study, some of them we will not. All of them can be studied. And the main thing that I want to say here is that you can study all of these using simple Excel calculations. You don't have to do fancy math, you don't have to do calculus, differential equations, optimization of functions, etc. All of these things are simple if you do them one step at a time, if you do one complication at a time. If you do multiple complications, that you get into trouble, because for example, if I set up this model with interaction between city, and then as we will set it up, things get complicated. It's become harder to think what's happening. But if you understand each of the pieces separately, then you can understand how the interaction happens. So the complexity is understood by understanding all of the simple parts separately. So now we move to the city. Again, we keep the city production separate. So now the capitalists have machines. It's very parallel, our model, to the land, and they have produced manufactured goods, let's say textiles. So now each capitalist has one machine for producing textiles, and he needs to hire 1 unit of labor, and this will produce 1 unit of textile. For short run analysis, as we will do for the moment, we assume capital is fixed. But this is the big difference, and this is the major difference, and a very important difference, that the machines are produced. So if you're getting profits in the industrial sector, you will start manufacturing more machines. So unlike land, where land is fixed, you can't start manufacturing more land. You can't start manufacturing land, but you can manufacture capital. So in a dynamic economy, how much investment is being made is a very important factor that plays an important role in um, dynamics, but okay, we will not do that for the moment. So let us assume that urban wages are exogenous. Again, this means that urban labor should be mobile across cities. This is not actually very plausible, but we do it to keep things simple. So now we have a simple solution to the problem of what will be the production levels of textiles in the city. As long as the price of textile is greater than the cost of production, and the cost of production is just the price of urban labor, urban wages will be different from rural wages. So production will take place. The demand for labor will be exactly equal to the number of machines in the city. And so I will assume that, let me try to do this. So we have 200 industrialists. Each one has a unit of capital, one machine. And by combining one machine with one laborer, industrialists can produce 1 unit of textiles. Again, units of labor are arbitrary. It can be 10 or 100, whatever. And unit of textile is also arbitrary. It can be. Now, so in the simple model in which we have complete endogeneity, complete exogeneity. So the price of labor is fixed and the price of textiles is fixed, and we can assume that both are determined in the international market. So then, or the national market, as long as it doesn't interfere with the village. So in the village nobody buys clothes, or a small number of people buy clothes, it doesn't affect. But most of the textiles is exported to even the local market. So that means that the price can be exogenous, the price of textile, and the urban wage can be exogenous, because that's determined by the international, by the national wage level for factory workers. So the factory workers then move from city to city wherever they can find work. So that will determine that. So they are not attached to their society. This is one of the things that Polanyi mentions, that the market society does. It detaches people from their social context. And that is a huge harm that is done to the person and to the society. So suppose I go to a small village and in Pakistan, and there is no doubt that all children are the same. In that village, I pick up a child and I give him training which enables him to go to MIT and Harvard. So what will happen? This child will not be able to adjust to his life. He will be of no benefit to his village. He may then settle in America, and so doing this will not. And some people have this idea that this is what we should do. That there's huge amounts of talent, and there's no doubt about it. So we give it the best education. That's not going to help the society, because you have detached the person from his society. So he will be alien. He will not be able to understand his own people, why they think like that, when in MIT they don't think like that. And so he will be trying to convert his people, to explain how to become more modern, more advanced, which will be, and they will not understand what he is trying to say. So these people who are now rootless, they move from city to search for jobs. That's what makes the wage exogenous. So if the price is exogenous, the wage is exogenous, then the city production is very easy. You have a fixed number of machines and you produce. If there is a profit and you don't, if there is no profits, there's one more thing that I wanted to do. I hope we have internet. Oh yes, we do. So I wanted to look at the corn laws Wikipedia article. This is very important. Because our model allows us to understand certain events which are otherwise very mysterious. Good. You got this. So these are corn laws which were imposed between 1815 and 1846. Remember that 1815 is the start of the Industrial Revolution, and actually this is also I think this was the end of the Speenhamland laws period. Breakup of 1832 was when the poverty was repealed. So corn laws were enforced in this period, which was a critical period of transition where things were moving from the agrarian economy towards the industrial economy. There was a shift in power. So in 1815 a law was passed to restrict imported grain. So what is this? This is the action of the landlords. The landlords don't want to have the product which they are selling, which is grain, which is corn. So the corn laws imposed steep import duties even when the food supplies were short. So these were supported by the landowners and opposed by the industrialists and the workers in the cities, because the food will be more expensive. There was an anti-corn law league which came into existence, and they started to campaign. And so this is also very important to understand, because the ideas that are spread, as I already discussed, there is a certain set of ideas which will be promoted by the landlords, and these were also said and promoted, and there's another set of ideas which the industrialists will push, and the real agenda of neither one will be apparent. So corn is actually any grain which includes grinding, so especially wheat. So this is actually, we are talking about bread. So there was Importation Act in 1815 which basically prevented the import of grains unless the price of bread was too high, and then in 1846 it was repealed. So this is exactly, the balance of power is shifting from agriculture to industry. The economic issue was food prices. Price of grain was central, and the working man spent most of his wages on bread. So actually this was crucial in the cities. So to the laborer in the cities, it seems like this is a good thing, that let the price of food go down. How he doesn't understand that this is not really in the long run much to his benefit, although it will benefit him. But the real benefit will go to the industrialist, who will be able to reduce the wages of labor, because the subsistence wage depends on the price of food. So if the price of food is low, then the industrialists can pay lower wages. Now these things cannot be understood in the neoclassical framework at all, because in the neoclassical understanding, the wage that you pay to the labor is fixed by the production process. So it has nothing to do with food. So then when you come, and when I come with a mental framework of neoclassical ideas, then you can't understand what is going on, because why should the price of food matter to the industrialist? they have to pay the laborer the same nominal wage anyway, but actually the industrialists are fighting very hard to get this repealed. Why? Because the wage is not fixed by technical conditions, wage is fixed by subsistence level wages. And now when that is clear, then it becomes clear that it's in the interest of the industrialist to fight for lower food prices, because then he can pay his laborers less and he can get more profits. This is an argument which cannot be made within the new classical framework. So the political issue was a dispute between landowners, a long established class who were heavily overrepresented in the parliament, and the new class which was emerging of manufacturers and industrialist workers, and these are not represented in the parliament. So the former, the landlords, wanted to maximize profits from agriculture by keeping the prices at which they could sell their grain high. We have in Pakistan, the sugarcane prices are kept high by the landlords who have interest. And the industrialists wanted to, the latter that is the industry, want to maximize the profits for manufacture by reducing the wages they paid to their factory workers. So Wikipedia understands what's going on. This is an argument which is not understandable from the production function theory, because food prices cannot affect how much you pay to the worker. You pay them marginal product of labor, and that has nothing to do with food price. So in practice, when you have high grain prices, then you have to pay more to the laborers to induce them to work, because you have to pay them subsistence wages. So the corn laws enhanced the profits and political power associated with land ownership, and when they were abolished, then trade increased, and that was helpful to the industrialists as well, because they can sell their manufacturers abroad. In 1813, this is the law which is useful to look at, to understand, that the foreign grain corn will be excluded from the market until the price of corn exceeds 80 shillings. So there was some concession made that if the food becomes too expensive, then we will allow imports, which is standard. Malthus believed this to be a fair price. Now, Malthus made the general equilibrium argument, which actually can be valid in some situations. That he says that if you reduce the laborer's wages, then one source of your demand goes down. The laborers are also part of your aggregate demand, and this is one part of the Keynesian argument also. These are things which happen when you look at the general equilibrium picture, which so far we haven't. So when you are paying wages, the income of the laborers, both in the rural area and in the city, this income will be used to buy goods. And so if you take measures to reduce their wages, then you will reduce aggregate demand, and that will cause some problem economic, although there are other issues as well. So these we will take into account. Now there was a eruption of Mount Tambora in 1815, which was worldwide. I think it was Krakatoa is the name. I'm not sure. One of the islands in Indonesia exploded, and the explosion was such massive that the cloud covered the whole world, and there was darkness, so 1816 was a year without a summer, and there was famine because the crop yields went down, and there was huge food shortages. In 1820, the merchants petitioned to end the protective tariffs. So this is the Prime Minister, who claimed to be in favor of free trade, blocked the petition. So these are standard maneuvers that, you see, the Prime Minister has to appease both the landlords and the manufacturers. So he claimed to be, because this is now an emerging class and they have also some power, so he claimed to be on their side, but he acted on the behalf of the landlord side. In 1821, the president of the Board of Trade said that we should revoke, but nothing happened. So there was lots of political maneuvering. So there's a constant battle going on between the anti-Corn Law group and the Corn Law group, representing different interests. The Whig government, which is the in England there were two classes, Whigs and Tories. I think the Whigs were the old established classes and the Tories were the new manufacturers. So the Whig government was in power from 1830 to 1841, and nearly every year there was a motion to repeal the laws. But however, their own Whig member of Parliament, Villiers, proposed motions for repeal, but in every year from 1837 to 1845, but in every year it was defeated. Finally, in 1846, it was repealed. The trigger for the event was actually the Irish potato famine, which caused massive suffering. Again, so Richard Cobden arguing in Parliament for Cobden was the one actually who was the spirit behind the repeal. He said that it would guarantee the prosperity of the manufacturer by affording outlets. So actually, when you put in laws against importation, they have general effect. Other people put in laws against your products. So he said that the industrialists would be able to export their products. If you get cheap price of food and you have more employment, as we have seen, that if you if you allow the imports of bread, then the price of bread would go down, and that would allow expansion in the production. The profits of the landlords will go down, and the wage will go down. So all of these things you can understand. This is what the model is helpful for. I mean, you can read this qualitatively and you won't understand why the industries are arguing for this, why the farmers are, unless, you see, this is what the model helps us to do. The model helps us to understand the real world. And that's only if you can understand the model. If the model itself is so complicated and wrong, then the model is of useless. Now with this model in the background, we can read this article and understand it. Without that model, you can read this article and you would not understand who was arguing for what and why. So it would make agriculture more efficient by stimulating demands for its products. When the demand for products expands, then the agriculturists whose profits have gone down, now they will be motivated to produce more efficiently. This is certainly true, that when there's already surplus, yani they don't have to compete, then they don't have to produce more efficiently. It doesn't pay them to look for better agricultural techniques. And it will introduce mutually advantageous international trade, a new era of international fellowship and peace. Now again, this is wrong, but this is a standard process, that something that is beneficial to you is projected as something which is beneficial for everybody. So actually at this point England is ahead of the rest of the world in industrial, so free trade is extremely advantageous for them and harmful to the other countries which need to develop their industries. But at this point the free trade agenda was widely spread and England was the leading country. So when they said that free trade is good for everybody, people were inclined to believe it, that yes, they have gotten so far, so what they are saying must be true. Just like today we believe everything America says, even though many of the things that they say are directly or in their interest are harmful to our interest, but they tell us that this is in our interest and we believe it because they are powerful and far ahead of us, and so that we must follow their advice so that we can become like them. So the arguments being made, this is something which Polanyi has said, that no class by itself is able to enforce its will upon others by power, so therefore they make arguments in such a way that other people will come on board. This doesn't necessarily involve just pure fraud like what I'm saying. It also involves sometimes making concessions to their interests and sometimes acting against your own interests so that you can get other people to participate in your cause. So this is a important thing to understand when we want to study politics and how it relates to economy. This is called political economy. So what Cobden said in favor of repealing the Corn Law was that people have to pay so much for them for food that they have little to buy clothes with, textile and food, and so few clothes are sold. So he's making the same argument that Keynes made later, that if food prices are high, then the aggregate demand for manufacturers will be low from the laborers because they will spend all their income on buying food. And so aggregate demand, so little clothing will be produced, and what he says is that if the aggregate demand for clothing falls, then the mills will shut down and the demand for labor will go down. And so this is a type of a Keynesian argument which, in order to understand this one, we will need to study the general equilibrium effects, which we have not studied so far, whether or not it's true. So there was opposition to the repeal in yes. This repeal was not an easy job. 1844 there was good harvest, so opposition became less. But in 1845 there were poor harvest and great famine, and there was scarcity of food in Britain and starvation in Ireland. And so the Prime Minister argued that tariffs should be repealed, and the government decided to recall the parliament. There's a huge fight, and ultimately they won, the industrialists, because the landlords were still very strong, and after the repeal there was still some pressure from the landlords to put them back. The last thing that I want to look at is what were the effects of this on the economics. So basically, while the during the period from 1814 to 1844, where the laws were in place, the average price of wheat was around 60 shillings. From 1850 onward, it declined to 52. So the repeal was effective in bringing down the price of food. And the real problems emerged actually in 1877, when the American wheat became very cheap and the transport became very cheap. So these became a real threat, and at that point there was a real agitation in Britain to bring back the corn laws, but by the time the tide had already turned, the industrialists were much stronger, and so there was no serious possibility of that, and so the free trade era had started, and so you can trace the effect of the corn laws on all of the factors. You can trace the effect on the price of wheat, the wage of rural labor, the wage of industrial labor, the profits being made by industrialists. All of these follow the pattern that our simple model shows would happen. And actually you can trace the same thing in contemporary society. If you look at what happened since 1980, I had the graphs, but we run out of time. Since 1980s, after the deregulation took place and the capitalists got huge. Basically in 1929, after the Great Depression, a lot of laws were made which prevented the capitalists from capitalists from exploiting their advantage. And Keynesian economics also says that the government has to support the worker. So from 1930 to 1980, there was a period of prosperity for American laborers, and in Europe. From 1980 onwards, Reagan-Thatcher era, the capitalists gained power again, and from that time you can see that the labor wage has gone to subsistence level, the capitalist profits have skyrocketed, and this whole phenomena of massive income inequality, everybody is talking about it, and basically the labor wage has gone to subsistence levels again, because they have lost the political power that was created partly by the ideology, the Keynesian economics. You see, the relation between ideas and material theory is very important. So when Keynesian economics became discredited due to a cheap trick by Friedman, it wasn't really a defect in Keynesian economics, it was a clever attack on the idea. Then the idea that the government should provide support for labor became discredited, and that let the power of that. So there is a close relationship between power and knowledge, and the ideas that are generated are also part of power. So changing the ideas is also a way to recapture power. Okay, so that's all for today. If I can manage it, I will try to arrange a game